cloud and hill fog. This is coming with a band of patchy outbreaks of rain and drizzle, mainly affecting southwest Scotland into Northern Ireland and other Irish Sea coastal areas. We could see some brighter spells eventually developing for the Northern Isles, where the winds will eventually ease out later on in the day as well. But the best of the sunshine once the freezing fog does clear across the southeast. However, cold air in place here, temperatures only really getting to 3 or 4 degrees. It will be mildest underneath that cloud, and it's going to stay mildest overnight as well, where we see that cloud pretty much persisting across northern western areas. Meanwhile, further to the south and east, a sharp frost developing tonight down to as low as -8 Celsius in some rural prone locations. Certainly some ice scrapers may be needed as you head out first thing this morning, and we could see the return of, again, some freezing fog patches. So you do head out for work on Monday morning, do just take care for any dense patches here. They will eventually clear off to allow some brighter spells, but we could just see a bit of ingress of the cloud across southeastern areas of England. Meanwhile, that cloud in the northwest is pretty much staying put, so it is likely to be another fairly grey and drab day. The contrast in temperatures continues, though, staying mild in the northwest, highs around 10 degrees Celsius in some coastal locations, but still fairly cold in the southeast, and it's going to return to be a fairly cold night once again as the frost redevelops into the evening. As we move on into the rest of the week, that cloud in the northwest is slowly going to sink its way southwards, and that will also bring the milder air further towards southern areas of England as well. Enjoy your day.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that matter across the country. And we've plenty coming up, including with Boris Johnson and Nadeem Zahawi hitting the headlines for questionable financial issues that have now been made public, we'll be talking integrity in politics. Have we a government that's in a bit of a mess again, but perhaps cannot find it in its heart of hearts to step down and give you a choice again? Jacinda Ardern said in New Zealand this week that she quit as Prime Minister because she'd run out of energy. So what do you think of how we change leaders? We tend to chuck them out the window rather than wait for them to run out of ideas. Is this government approaching critical mass on criticism? Plus, the cost of energy and school strikes. Your thoughts, please. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Aaron Armstrong.
Good afternoon to you. It's 1:01. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. A manhunt is underway in California after at least 10 people were killed in a shooting at a Lunar New Year festival. A warning: the following contains flashing images. Thousands of people had gathered at Monterey Park near Los Angeles when a gunman opened fire. At least 10 other people have been injured, some of whom are in a critical condition. Police are looking for a male suspect who fled the scene. They say it's too early to determine any motive. Well, as you've just been hearing, Labour has reported Boris Johnson to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards over allegations the chairman of the BBC helped the former Prime Minister arrange a loan. It follows a report in the Sunday Times that claims Richard Sharp was involved in talks about financing Mr Johnson in late 2020, weeks before he was recommended for the BBC job by the former Prime Minister. A spokesperson for Mr Johnson has dismissed the report as rubbish. Richard Sharp insists there was no conflict of interest. Labour and the SNP, though, have called for an independent inquiry. Meanwhile, a cabinet minister has told GB News Nadhim Zahawi has the Prime Minister's support following allegations about his tax affairs. The Tory party chairman is under increasing political pressure after revealing he made a careless but not deliberate error over a multi-million-pound share sale in the polling company he founded. The former Chancellor has not disclosed the size of the settlement with HMRC, thought to be almost £5 million, or confirm if he paid a fine. Labour's called his position untenable, but the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, says he believes Mr Zahawi has paid his taxes.
I don't know any more details than what he has already put in the public domain. I don't think it would be right or proper for me to speculate or guess about any further details about his tax affairs. But he has been a successful entrepreneur, building a company which has paid tax, employing people who have paid taxes, and he has himself paid tax, a considerable amount, because he's been successful.
The Business Secretary says he'll name and shame the energy firms forcing households to switch to prepayment meters. Grant Shapps has asked companies to stop moving households onto more expensive prepaid tariffs. He says they should instead focus on helping those struggling to pay their bills. The energy companies have also been asked by Mr Shapps to reveal the number of warrant applications they've made to enter properties. European countries are putting renewed pressure on Germany to authorise the supply of its tanks to Ukraine. Several countries want to send their German-made Leopard tanks, but they need Berlin to give it the green light. Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania say Germany, as a leading European power, has a special responsibility in restoring peace on the continent. Berlin insists it's not blocking deliveries, but has yet to make a decision about supplying its tanks to Ukraine. US investigators have found more classified documents during a 13-hour search of President Joe Biden's home in Delaware. Some were from Biden's time as a senator, others from when he served as vice president under Barack Obama. Now, they are the latest in a series of classified documents found to have been in Biden's possession. Former President Donald Trump is facing a criminal investigation over his handling of sensitive documents. At least 300 migrants have entered the UK on 8 small boats overnight, making it the busiest day of channel crossings so far this year. GB News understands several other boats also set off this morning but haven't yet made it to the UK. The boats are monitored by French naval vessels. They're only allowed to intervene if migrants get into difficulty. Today's arrivals bring the total number of those crossing the channel this year to 450. The Scottish Environment Minister says the use of dogs to hunt and kill wild animals has no place in modern Scotland. Mary McCallan's comments come as Next week's vote looms on the new hunting with dogs bill. Since 2002, it's been against the law to hunt a wild animal with a dog, with the new bill expected to close loopholes in current laws. And Buckingham Palace has revealed details for His Majesty's Coronation weekend in May. Charles and Camilla will both be crowned at Westminster Abbey on the 6th of May in a televised service conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury. A concert will then be held at Windsor Castle the following day, featuring what the Palace have described as global music icons. Thousands of events are expected to take place all over the country, with a bank holiday declared for Monday the 8th. Now, this is GB News. No doubt more on many of our top stories coming up shortly with Alastair Stewart and friends.
Aaron, thank you very much indeed. The surprise departure of Jacinda Ardern as Prime Minister of New Zealand, saying it was triggered by a barrage of abuse and vilification and misogyny, got me wondering, who would want to do that job anyway, indeed anywhere? And to be fair to Ms Ardern, she also said that there was nothing left in the tank. She'd run her course in her own mind. Now, in the Sun newspaper today, Karen Brady, who knows a little bit about being at the top of her game as a woman in a world that tends to be dominated by men, suggests that maybe Ms Ardern is better at reading opinion polls than some others. She may have sensed that she was simply heading for defeat, and that if she ran again, it would end badly. Others, including Dan Hannan in The Telegraph, remind us that Ms Ardern was an early and very keen adopter of lockdown in response to the pandemic. Well, like here, that is not universally popular as a policy. It's not that long ago since we had a Prime Minister in this country who said that he dreamed of the top job since childhood. Indeed, Boris Johnson had even dreamed of being King of the world, let alone just the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. But why do some want to do it in the first place? Some doubtless seek the highest elected office in the land because they are on a mission. Margaret Thatcher is an obvious example on economics and politics, and Tony Blair just in terms of making his party electable again after a rather lengthy period in the shadows and in the doldrums. Now, in many ways, the top job itself is not in our gift. It's in the gift of the political party that musters most MPs in a general election. Of course, we vote for those MPs, so if more and more and more of us vote Tory, you get a Tory government and a Tory Prime Minister, and the reverse applies if more and more of us happen to vote Labour. Those MPs, of course, can be fickle, and in recent times we've had a pretty rapid turnover of Tory party leaders. Keir Starmer's position seems to me fairly secure at the moment, having replaced Jeremy Corbyn, the darling of many in the rank and file of the Labour Party, but deemed by most simply to be unelected. But even Sir Keir Starmer shocked many recently when he told Laura Kuenssberg that he never really wanted to be leader. The power of the office is immense, as is the capacity to steer the nation's affairs unequalled. But with it comes endless scrutiny, and rightly so, given all of that power. So why would anybody want to do it? And does it require a very special person with a particular set of values? Should more, like Ms Ardern, perhaps have the guts and honesty to call it a day when they think that their tank is empty? So today, we're looking at what folk want that job for and the pressures that it brings with it. Rishi Sunak appears, I think, at the moment secure after a period of Conservative bloodletting, but from a tax on his wife for her tax affairs and also just her wealth, the seatbelt matter was, of course, of his own making and perhaps his smaller beer compared to some of the things that have been said about his background. Labour say that he clearly comes across as being an out-of-touch, wealthy man, having been criticised recently for taking government jets at the drop of a hat when trains and cars perhaps could have got him from A to be. Now, to me, the bigger problem is that I'm not still entirely clear beyond the 5 pledges what that man that you're looking at, if you joined us on television, really wants to achieve with this great country, why he wants to keep that job. And I'd love to know what you think. Would you like more senior politicians who will say, do you know, I'm done, set myself up a few ambitions and I've achieved most of them? How fares your faith generally in politics and in those who would lead and govern us? In their attacks on the Labour Party chairman over his tax affairs, the Tory party... Sorry, let me start that again. In their attacks on the Tory party chairman over his tax affairs, the Labour Party say that there should be, generally speaking, greater transparency in public life. Do you think that that's right? And does it increase the chances of the best person getting to the top job in our elected political system? Do get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk or via all or any of our social media outlets. Well, delighted to say that to start this conversation, I'm joined by an old mate of mine, Alex Dean, former Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister David Cameron. Did Dave always want to be PM?
I think so, yes, I think that's right. Certainly, I remember I, of course, knew him. It's a double-edged sword. I worked with him in opposition, not in government, and so I knew him when he was a relatively junior member of the Conservative Party's front bench. But even then, I think his ambition was perfectly clear, so yes.
What was also perfectly clear, even in the early days, as I said in that introduction, that actually he did have a vision. He wanted to modernise the Conservative Party, not quite as radically and fundamentally as Tony Blair did with Labour and Charles Clarke and John Reid and the rest of them, but he knew that there was something going wrong and that the core values of the Conservative Party had perhaps slipped a little away from ordinary people, whether it was, you know, hug a hoodie or hug a tree, but just to get more engaged. And there's a big piece in one of the papers this morning saying Tories have really got to re-engage with the younger generation or they're going to go down that road again that Cameron brought them back from.
Well, of course, that was what the much-mocked hug a hoodie piece was about, trying to reconnect with younger people, because there was a firm sense the Conservative Party had drifted from them. The equally mocked hug a husky was part of the initiative that put the Conservative Party back in the right position on the environment. And I would point out, the environment now in this country is not a party political issue. There's, broadly speaking, consensus on left and right about the importance of preserving the environment. People can criticise that for different perspectives. But the point is, it's not a party political argument. No. And that is part of the Cameron vision that he changed things about. I was listening to your introduction with real interest because, plainly, Margaret Thatcher had a serious political vision, whether you liked her or loathed her. But I would say, too, that a number of the politicians that have been in power more recently have had real visions that may have been stymied for different reasons. Boris Johnson had a big, expansive vision about the state playing, and some Conservatives will find this controversial, a larger part in national life, and grand projet and doing things that was, largely speaking, stymied by coronavirus and plunging the economy into cessation for a good part of 2 years. Sure, we deliberately tanked our economy. So the Johnson vision was stymied. The Truss vision was stymied by the markets and immediate reaction from all around her. But you can't deny she had a profound ideological vision of departure from the status quo.
And Truss economics and Kwarteng economics have not run out of friends yet. You cannot pick up a proper broadsheet newspaper without reading a piece that says Truss is reaching out to her friends in America on this economic approach, and that there are people who are still lobbying around her and have not yet given up, because not only was it a vision, arguably it was very good vision.
Well, I agree with that, but I would say that I, as a Conservative, absolutely refuse to allow our opponents to steal a march on this and say, oh, well, free market economics is dead for a generation, which is their kind of messaging. No, it's not. It didn't work here because it was very poorly executed, and it was executed in an environment of panic, right? Sunak emanates calm. Right? Prime Minister is the right Prime Minister at the right time to try and calm the markets and convey a sense of stability. But the idea that we could now re-inject a bit of that enthusiasm and vision that we had in the post-Johnson era, I welcome that.
Interestingly, that both in the case of Thatcher, she was ousted eventually when the majority in the cabinet turned against her. One thing that struck me as being very curious about Dave Cameron is that he promised a referendum when he delivered it, and he said, if I lose it, he will go, and he did. Why didn't he go when he came back from Brussels with his tail between his legs, having been rebuffed and rejected by Merkel and others, trying to do an incredibly sensible deal on free movement of people, saying, look, you've got to sort this out, otherwise it's going to mean we leave the European Union and others will follow.
So I think the answer, and of course that was long after I'd worked for him, the answer there is that he and those around him genuinely thought that the package that they'd secured in that negotiation was good enough. The ability to say, we have ended ever closer union, which would have come about if that deal had been agreed. Bear in mind, that deal never went through because the UK voted to leave the EU, so it became a nullity. But the Cameron administration believed that. I think they were wrong. You know, I think that they were never going to get anything good enough out of Brussels to satisfy people in this country. And moreover, there were plenty of people in and around that process who were saying, we demand this, we don't really mean it, you have to do this now, don't worry, this Euroscepticism will go away soon, which is no real way to negotiate. But I just pick you up on one thing. That's not what the Cameron administration said about the referendum. Cameron said that if he was going to be our Prime Minister either way, and then promptly changed his mind because it was untenable. And the reason they did that was that unlike Harold Wilson's referendum in '75, where Wilson said, I'm going to be your Prime Minister either way, so I'm going to step away, Cameron's position was, I'm going to be your Prime Minister either way, now I'm going to become a partisan because everyone says I've got to be deeply involved in it. And that's all the difference in the world. That's why his position was untenable, whereas Wilson's, if the result had gone the other way, would have been.
I stand elegantly corrected. Thank you for that, Alex. Final quick one. How much trouble is Sunak, Zahawi and the party in at the moment?
So Sunak, in my view, none at all. And I think most people in this country look at the fuss that has been generated over, and I can't believe they're giving it a gate, seatbelt gate or belt gate. It's not the issue isn't whether the Prime Minister gets a fixed penalty notice or not. The issue is the complete lack of any sense of proportion over these questions. And most people in the country know what it's like to have a momentary lapse of judgment and undo their seatbelt at the wrong time in a car. Almost all of us have done it. The internet was immediately awash with images of every leader of the Labour Party speaking to camera, having done in recent years, having done it. And when you have journalists, not on this channel, but other channels, journalists interviewing one another, you know, how bad is this for the Prime Minister? How much trouble is he in? Well, we're talking about it, so he must be in a lot of trouble. Totally circular and totally self-fulfilling. Right? So I don't think the Prime Minister's in any trouble. On the chairman of the Conservative Party, he will, I mean, it must have stung. He's just paid a seven-figure settlement with HMRC. And as far as HMRC is concerned, and I only know what's in public, the same way that James Cleverly does, their position is that he made an error that was careless but not deliberate. That applies in this country every year to hundreds of thousands of people. So again, to my mind, it's a question of proportionality and the media sensing that as soon as there's the slightest thing wrong, forget any presumption of innocence, forget that anyone's entitled to due process, insist that they've got to go. Well, that's for the birds.
Maybe Ms Arden was right after all. Alex, great to see you.
Thanks so much.
As you very kindly said when you walked in, we hadn't seen each other before. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
And keep in touch. Always welcome on the programme. Alex Dean, their former advisor to Dave Cameron in opposition. Well, joining me now, I'm delighted to say, is another old friend of mine, Aubrey Allegretti, who's leading political correspondent at The Guardian. Same question to you as I just put to Alex and got a very balanced and elegant answer to. How much trouble do you think Mr Sunak and his government are in right now?
Relatively little when it comes to the sort of the scandals that we're seeing dominate the front pages today. I mean, there are naturally going to be more questions asked because very little has actually been confirmed so far about exactly which rules Mr Zahawi may have broken or exactly how much tax he's actually repaid. I think my colleague on The Guardian was reporting that it was around a 30% penalty. And so whilst it's probably true that lots of people do sort of make incorrect tax returns every year, I think the difference in this case is that it's a government minister, that it is alleged to be a seven-figure sum, and that this isn't something that happened sort of 20 years ago. The tax event happened sort of about 2 or 3 years ago, apparently. So there are probably going to be questions that continue to loom. What obviously we saw during the Boris Johnson era was that ministers and MPs became so fed up with these kind of questions dominating the narrative that they didn't get to talk about policy issues or what they really wanted to do. And that's the danger, again, that Rishi Sunak's government sort of has this ongoing issue that it's unable to shake the kind of sleaze culture that engulfed Boris Johnson's premiership. That's probably where the greatest danger lies for Rishi in the long term.
Did the Arden departure shock or surprise you? Not least for one of the principal reasons that she offered. I love the one that the tank was empty. I think that's incredibly honest and to be celebrated. But the fact that it is a ghastly world, and Alex has just been saying, and you've echoed much of it, these guys and gals cannot put a singular foot wrong, even if it's a great big footstep like a big tax bill. Why would any sensible, calm person want to be getting into it?
There is just such granular scrutiny on everything politicians do. And I think there is a reluctance, particularly when you talk to British MPs, to acknowledge the real downsides of the job, because what they don't want to do ultimately is put off good, well-meaning people from following in their footsteps and taking up that career. So I think they're reluctant to admit the extent to which things like online abuse plays a role in how much they decide actually that this job is too hard, that it requires too much energy and too much of a thick skin to sort of shoulder to weather those kind of storms. So I think absolutely her reason given is definitely going to be accurate. She's probably decided she doesn't have enough in the tank. She's still relatively young as well. So, wanting to spend more time with your family when you have a sort of young child and a partner that you haven't yet married does absolutely kind of make sense, I think, to a lot of people. Having said that, obviously, there's the background to this, which is the sort of slow depletion in the polls of her and her party's popularity. There's an election coming up later in the year. And interestingly, the sort of narrative being painted by the incoming Prime Minister in New Zealand is quite similar to what Rishi Sunak has done, which is basically saying, look, the last administration was defined by dealing with a big health crisis, which led to a big economic crisis. That is what this government's going to be focused on. We're going to pare back all sorts of legislation that we had previously earmarked to be pursuing. We're just going to focus on the people's priorities, a phrase that's very similar to what Rishi Sunak's been saying here. So I think some very interesting parallels.
I'm going to cut that out of the tape and keep it for later on. Aubrey, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Aubrey Allegretti, their political correspondent at the Guardian newspaper. Finally, I'm delighted to be joined by Mario Cretura, who is a former special advisor to Theresa May. Great to see you, and thank you very much for finding time for us. Did Arden's explanation ring true for you, having worked very closely with another celebrated female leader in this country who got the top job?
No, it did. I think there's a huge amount to be said for the pressure that our prime ministers are under. There's a lot to the job. Their diaries are chock full of different commitments. And as you've said before, there's a lot of scrutiny, quite rightly, about the role and the decisions that they take. And I think crucially to that is a decision for the individual that once you've spent so long, in many cases decades, trying to get to the pinnacle of your political career, the situation that you're faced with often isn't of your making. So it's very much like a game of musical chairs, that when you feel that it's time to sit down, you sit down, and you're faced with the situation that you're faced with, whether it's COVID or Brexit or a cost of living crisis or the situation in Ukraine. Prime ministers, wherever they are in the world, have to make judgments at all times to try and see whether they are able to command a majority confidence in their parliament, their legislature, or frankly, in and of themselves. And so I think that Miss Ardern, when she was talking about not having enough in the tank, it's actually quite a noble thing to do. It's very hard to relinquish power.
Let me just underline one other crucial difference between Theresa and Lucinda, and that is that the attacks on Theresa, with nothing to do with misogyny at all, occasional tongue-in-cheek jokes about the footwear, but they were about policy, whether it was about immigration, about law and order, about Europe. When the party or the commentariat were having a go at Theresa May, it was on policy. That's more grown up.
I think so, and I think that when you're in that position, you're trying to justify your position at all times. But even still, the tricky job of being Prime Minister means that you do need to invest a huge amount of personal energy and passion into your role, and that does come at a cost, and eventually you do run out of steam. I think that's true of everyone. David Cameron very famously said when he was asked about a possible third term that 2 Weetabix is a great, but a third might be too much. And I think that ability to reflect on your ability, your enthusiasm for the role, if you feel that you're wanting, that can only be good for your country, whether it's informed by the political reality or your personal passions and energy levels.
Worked so closely with the Prime Minister who once described her own party as having once again become the nasty party. How much? I'll put the same question I put to Alex and to Aubrey. How much trouble do you think Rishi Sunak's government is in?
I think that Rishi's doing a phenomenal job. I mean, you mentioned his 5 pledges of halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing the debt, tackling migration, and helping to cut NHS waiting lists. And I think that if he and his administration are able to do that, then I think the British public will allow them the time to be able to do that, because they're very important matters, particularly with the cost of living crisis and the war in Ukraine being front of a lot of people's minds. I think Alex and Aubrey have mentioned that the seat belt and other issues recently are relatively low down the priority order. The priority list for most members of the British public. And I think if we can get back to some of the really important matters that are facing people in my area and people that I know, then I think that Rishi will be a very successful Prime Minister, and I hope the best is yet to come.
Great talking to you, Mario. Thank you very much for those thoughts and for your reflections on Theresa as well. Very, very good to see you on the programme. Thank you very much indeed. That's Mario Cretura, former special advisor to Theresa May in her time as leader of the Conservative Party and indeed Prime Minister. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with lots more coming up on today's programme, including some of the stuff that Mario was just talking about. We'll also be talking about the King's Coronation being held in May this year, and the plans for the weekend have been announced. They include a performance at Windsor Castle. We'll have all of the details next with our royal correspondent. But first, the weather.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Today and over the next few days, the UK is a bit of a battleground between cold and milder air. High pressure over Scandinavia, but stretching its way down into southeastern areas of England, is holding the cold air intact here. The frontal systems, though, that are trying to push their way into the north and west are also dredging up some milder air. Milder air at this time of the year, though, is accompanied by a fair amount of cloud, and we will see some patchy outbreaks of rain and drizzle continuing across southwest Scotland and other Irish Sea coastal areas overnight. Where we hold on to the clearer skies, further to the south and east, temperatures will be dropping off quite rapidly, down to -5, -4 Celsius in some towns and cities. This will be accompanied by freezing fog developing overnight. Could be quite dense in places, so do just take care where you are heading out first thing on Monday morning. Likely to linger through the morning across the likes of Cambridgeshire, but eventually clearing away to allow some brighter spells. Cloud pushing its way into Kent and areas of East Anglia. Meanwhile, the cloud over northern and western areas is going to remain fairly persistent, and it could be another largely grey day with further outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Going to stay mild in the north and west, though. Highs of 9, 10 degrees Celsius here, but only around 3 degrees further to the south and east. Into Monday evening, it's a relatively similar picture, but because we've now got the cloud filtering its way into the far southeast, the frost will just hold off a bit more here, and it'll be that central slice of England where temperatures will readily drop off once again. As we move into the rest of the week, that cloud in the north and west is slowly going to push its way southwards with this frontal system. So we will eventually see some cloudier and also milder conditions across southern areas of England as we move towards the middle of the week. Behind that cold front, though, we will see an ingress of some slightly colder air, so temperatures will fall off a bit for the likes of Edinburgh and Belfast, but not too cold, more around average for the time of year by the time we get to Wednesday and Thursday. See you later.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
It's just after 1:30. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. A suspect is on the run in California after a shooting in which at least 10 people have been killed. A warning, flash images coming up in the next pictures. Emergency services have been responding to an incident in Monterey Park near Los Angeles where thousands of people had gathered for a Lunar New Year festival. A further 10 people have been taken to hospital to be treated for injuries, at least one of whom is in a critical condition. It is the 5th mass shooting in the United States this month. Labour's reported Boris Johnson to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards over allegations the chairman of the BBC helped the former Prime Minister arrange a loan weeks before he was recommended for the job by Mr Johnson. The calls come as the former Prime Minister visited Ukraine this morning as part of the country's Unity Day. The Sunday Times has reported that the Tory donor Richard Sharp was involved in talks about financing Mr Johnson when he was in financial difficulty in late 2020. A spokesperson for the former Prime Minister has dismissed the report as rubbish. Richard Sharp says there was no conflict of interest. Meanwhile, a cabinet minister told GB News Nadeem Zahawi has the Prime Minister's support following allegations about his tax affairs. The Tory party chairman has admitted he reached a settlement with HMRC following an error over a controversial multi-million-pound shareholding in the polling company YouGov. Labour has called his position untenable, but the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, believes Mr Zahawi has paid his taxes.
I don't know any more details than what he has already put in the public domain. I don't think it would be right or proper for me to speculate or guess about any further details about his tax affairs. But he has been a successful entrepreneur, building a company which has paid tax, employing people who have paid taxes, and he has himself paid tax, a considerable amount, because he's been successful.
And US investigators have found more classified documents during a 13-hour search of President Joe Biden's home in Delaware. Some of them were from Biden's time as a senator, others from his role as vice president to Barack Obama. A special counsel has been appointed to investigate how the president has handled sensitive documents. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. But now it is back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Aaron, thank you very much indeed. After yesterday's weird and wonderful speculation about the coronation of King Charles III, including get your breeches down, as said the Sun newspaper, not in terms of making some bizarre spectacle of himself, but changing the costume that the former Prince of Wales might wear when he became formerly King Charles III. We now have the facts. And as we said on this programme yesterday, perhaps a little predictably, but let's not moan about that, let's celebrate it. It seems to be a clever blend of the traditional with the modern. And what's interesting, I think, is if you, whichever newspaper, singular or plural, that you buy, it gets a clear hurrah from the broadsheet newspapers and indeed the red tops. The Telegraph leads on the fact that there is a nod to the National Health Service plan, that there is a nod to the plight of refugees as well. The coronation itself, which will launch the three-day affair, is expected to be watched by tens of millions of people on television, both here in the United Kingdom and around the world, and of course bring a wave of tourism and soft earnings for this country, to which we all say hurrah as well. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by my good friend, our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, who has been looking through all of those precise details. One thing for me, standout, is confirmation that Camilla will also be crowned.
Yes, exactly. The King and
That's
Queen
a big
consort,
deal.
It is a big deal. It's the first time it's happened since the 1930s, and obviously all the history that goes back with Charles and Camilla. But yes, they are going to travel in the King's procession through the streets of London to Westminster Abbey for the service, which really dates back 900 years, Alastair, to the time of William the Conqueror, and they will be crowned together in Westminster Abbey in this service, which is, yes, going to have those traditional elements of the crowning, the anointing with holy oil, but it's also going to reflect, in Buckingham Palace's words, modern Britain and looking to the future and ahead of the monarchy. Now, following that very traditional, solemn religious service, they're going to travel in what's known as the Coronation procession back to Buckingham Palace in perhaps the Golden State coach has been talked about quite a lot. Of course, the Queen Elizabeth II used that in 1953 through the cheering crowds who will be lining the streets to Buckingham Palace for an appearance on the balcony with members of the royal family. Now, we don't know which members of the royal family. My best guess is it's working members of the royal family because that's what we saw at the
you and I were
Platinum
talking
Jubilee
before we came into the studio that amongst the tabloids particularly there is speculation that Harry is not included in the balcony lineup. And you quite rightly pointed out to me, of course, we still don't know whether Harry and Meghan will be there at all, period.
No, exactly. We don't have a guest list yet of who's going to be invited to the coronation, so it's unconfirmed if Harry and Meghan will arrive. I think for the royal family, it's damned if they do, damned if they don't, to be honest. I think it's going to be a distraction if they are here, because, of course, Harry and Meghan are here following the bombshell memoir, etc. But reportedly, Harry is in talks with a couple of US networks to commentate on the coronation if he doesn't attend the coronation in person, which clearly would be huge. But that, I must stress, that is unconfirmed,
Sure,
but it's still on the papers.
Another first, but you are the person who is uniquely qualified to correct me if I am wrong, is that the ever-popular Knees Up concert party, blah, 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 sees Windsor as much more of a focus than Buckingham Palace in these plans.
Yes, to my knowledge, I can't remember another massive concert that's happened at Windsor Castle for a ceremonial, British event such as this. So, yes...
The late Queen used to love using Windsor for big, big charity events, but not a Knees Up.
Yes, and of course the Royal Windsor Horse Show, a very firm favourite of the late Queen. But yes, this concert is going to be happening on the East Lawn, I think, of Windsor Castle the day following the coronation. It's going to be balloted, so people at home has the chance to get free tickets to this event. Thousands of tickets are expected to be given away, and of course it will be broadcast on television. But it's going to be A-list celebrities who are clearly going to be performing and world performers. But more interestingly, as you mentioned earlier, Alastair, a nod to the NHS, a nod to the Commonwealth and LGBT plus charities through what's being called a coronation choir. So different community groups across the country are all coming together to perform at this event on the stage. and a virtual choir of Commonwealth singers as well. So I think that perhaps is going to be quite special. We're going to have a big lunch as well, street parties, etc. across the country. The Queen Consort's been patron of that organisation since 2013, and a kind of volunteering initiative led by the Royal Voluntary Service, the Scouts, and organisations such as that, trying to better communities across the country. So it's a whole weekend of celebration.
Brilliant, and look forward to it very, very much indeed. A final, very quick one, if I may, because I'm being told we've only got a little bit of time left in my ear, and I don't wish to lower the tone or spoil the party, but what's the Duke of York up to?
Yes, front page of The Sun this morning. He's reportedly considering legal action to try and reverse the decision, the out-of-court settlements with Virginia Giuffre following that civil sexual assault case against him, which he has always denied. But following reportedly Virginia Giuffre, her abuse case against a high-profile US lawyer that's essentially crumbled, Prince Andrew's lawyers are reportedly considering whether they will A, try and force a retraction of because of course he's paid out of court on that, and even get an apology for Virginia Giuffre. Virginia Giuffre maintains her story that she was forced to have sex with Prince Andrew when she was 17. Prince Andrew has always denied that. We don't have confirmation from either side lawyers, but that's what's
Let us agree that we will both watch this space and report accordingly when the time comes. Indeed. Cameron, a great pleasure, and thank you for all of that very good detail on the coronation, an event for all of us genuinely to look forward to. Great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. You are indeed watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come this afternoon, including many online companies selling clear aligners with a claim that their products straighten teeth. Aligners, never heard them called that before, but there you go. Straighten teeth faster and cheaper than traditional braces. But if it all goes wrong, how much damage could it cause? I've been talking to an industry expert to find out more, so don't go away. But first, we're going to take a quick break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News, TV, radio and online. And thank you very much indeed for so doing. Now, some dentists say that the demand for perfect Instagram smiles is causing damage to our teeth after they have ordered clear braces or aligners, as I'm told by this, that they are called somewhere, online. Many online companies selling clear aligners claim that their products straighten teeth faster and cheaper than traditional braces. But if all goes wrong, how much damage could they have caused by that point? I'm intrigued to know and delighted to be joined by Dr. Anshu Sood, who is the chair of the British Orthodontic Society. That what you can buy online never fails to amaze me right across the entire spectrum. But the idea of going online to get braces sent to me through the post to put these wobbly old dentures in line, I literally just thought that is, no pun intended, jaw-dropping. How risky is it?
Well, I think the issue is that these services are perfectly freely available, the country, from your dentist, from your orthodontist. When I say freely available, as in accessible, they are, of course, coming with a fee. But it is important for people to understand that actually when they're accessing these services need to be clinician-led. It cannot be okay to just buy something over the internet, as you say, online, and hope that it will do the job that a professional can do.
Up on one thing, because we had a brilliant conversation on this programme a couple of weeks ago about the number of kids that are ending up in hospital as tiny wee lovely bed blockers because their dental care's gone out of the window because mum and dad simply cannot get hold of an NHS dentist. They can't afford to go private. You said that these aligners are available, but not everybody can find a dentist on the NHS, and I'm sure that they are easily available in the private sector. But is it a genuine assertion to say that if you really do need them, then you can get them on the NHS and you can find a dentist who'll provide that service?
I think NHS waiting lists for children have definitely been hit by COVID. Of course, we had NHS waiting lists prior to COVID, and they have only got worse since that time has happened. But what I think people need to understand is that for children, they will be able to access NHS treatment. The NHS have made that commitment that as long as you are referred to a dentist, even if you are no longer a child by the time your name comes to the top of that waiting list, you will still be entitled to treatment. Now, of course, I clearly understand your concerns that you've mentioned about how people are not able to access dentists. But basic dental hygiene has to come as a priority, basic dental health, over the straightening of teeth. For most adults who are accessing this service, the straightening of the teeth is a cosmetic improvement. It is not basic dental health. It
wouldn't fall into that category that you and doctors and other medical experts would do. It's not an acute issue. It's almost a cosmetic issue. I'd quite like that. And that's why a lot of folk are saying, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to dip into my own pocket and I'm going to go online and get these aligners.
Absolutely. And of course, these systems are available. They are available online. And I think our concern as the dental associations, as the British Orthodontic Society, as the Oral Health Foundation, is that we are working as a campaign that we call Safe Smile. So our concern is that if people are accessing these services online, they should be registered. Those patients should still be getting the same quality of treatment that they would be getting if they were going to a dentist or an orthodontist. We're not saying that every single one of these companies that's providing these online braces is inappropriate, but what we're saying is they should be held to the same standards that people would expect a high street dentist to be held to, so that they know that their money is being spent wisely and that they are not worse off at the end of their care than when they were when they started. Of course, we hear all of these examples of patients going over to Turkey and having cosmetic surgeries. You know, we use that as an example. It's almost become a stereotypical joke, hasn't it? But actually, we need to protect these patients to say that even if you are accessing an online service because you can't afford to go to a dentist, you can't afford to go to an orthodontist, you shouldn't be accessing a service that is of lesser safety, clarity, access. You should still be able to access your dentist. You should still have had, you know, a clinical assessment to make sure that your teeth were healthy before you started, that we knew that when we proceed with that treatment, we're not going to leave you off in a worse position than when you started, especially when these are cosmetic treatments.
I think I've got it crystal clear now from you, with all of the authority that you bring to the conversation, and that is that it can be done, and it can be done safely, and it can be done by proper people who are registered to do that job of work. But if they go online to your website, they'll see the other boxes that need to be ticked. What particularly, because it's very often young teens who want it done for all sorts of reasons, if something goes wrong, they also need to seek out a clear commitment to aftercare, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think our concern is, so from clinicians, we expect patients to have a direct clinical examination. These are all things that are now on the General Dental Council website, who are our regulators. A clinical examination, a clear understanding that the patient has healthy teeth, healthy bones, healthy gums before they start the treatment, that the patient is able to access their dentist. They know they have a named clinician who is leading that treatment, who discusses the pros and cons of the treatment for them specifically, not just generalised ones, but how they will affect that patient. And therefore, like you rightly said, so that when that patient, or if that patient has some concerns after, during, before their treatment, they actually have somewhere that they can go to. I think one of our biggest concerns with one of the large companies out there is that patients are expected, if they are not happy with their treatment, they will have signed an NDA to be able to get their money back if they raise a complaint. It is not appropriate for patients to have to sign a non-disclaimer in order for them to raise a concern or complaint about their treatment. That is completely unacceptable. And of course, that raises concerns as to where the line is drawn between providing healthcare and being a commercial entity.
Anshu Sood, real pleasure talking to you. Such wisdom and reassurance there. So don't absolutely say it's a no-no, but if you want to go down that road for whatever reasons, as Anshu said, just check who you're dealing with, check what your rights are, and all of the rest of it. And it's all available, as Anshu Sood said, on the official website of the Orthodontic Society. So there we are. Great to meet you, and thank you very much indeed for your time. Time now for Sunday Savings. Following our segment last week on repayment meters, it's now been reported that the Business Secretary, Grant Shapps, has warned companies that he will name and shame those who are doing nowhere near enough for vulnerable customers. There have been calls for a ban on the practice from charities, including Citizens Advice, which is a little perhaps more than a charity, a really important go-to source of guidance and advice. Meanwhile, customers on Economy 7 tariffs who pay different prices for energy, one rate for day and another for nighttime usage, have reported an increase in their bills despite the energy price cap. But what can those affected do about it? I'm delighted to be joined now by Catherine Porter, who is an energy consultant with What Logic. Catherine, great to see you again. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I mean, hurrah for Grant Shapps getting in there and joining the battle. But what are the rights of those individual consumers who are suddenly not quite waking up, but suddenly finding they've got something they've never asked for, or the price that they're being asked to pay is not what they agreed to? It's almost stealth.
Well, I think with this issue with Economy 7 meters, a lot of people who have them are not really sure how they're supposed to operate in practice. These meters and this whole system was introduced back in the 70s and the 80s for households that didn't have access to gas for heating. And the idea was that you had storage heaters, which was effectively a thermal mass, normally a piece of ceramic, that would be heated up with electricity at night time when it was cheaper, and then would release that heat during the day. And when Ofgem calculates the price cap for this tariff, it assumes that that's how people are using Economy 7. If you're to save money with Economy 7, you need to have something like 40 to 42% minimum of your electricity consumption happening during that cheap period, which is normally 11 p.m. until 6 a.m. or midnight until 7 a.m. It doesn't adjust with the clock change.
Unfortunately, I interrupt to say I am of an age you remember very clearly those storage heaters, not least at school. But also in the advice recently from the government about how to try and reduce your energy bill, and I presume they had these people on this daytime, nighttime pattern. They were saying, if you've really got to use the washing machine, which most of us do, or the tumbler dryer, which is very expensive, do it at nighttime rather than do it during the day. So it's not just storage heaters.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's actually terrible advice. Pretty much every fire brigade in the country warns people against running those appliances when they're unattended because they contain electric motors which are prone to catch fire. So it's actually a really risky practice to run large appliances like that at night time when people are asleep. And these days, because these devices are subject to energy efficiency rules, it's like 2 to 3 hours to run a normal cycle, which is pretty much half of your cheap rate period. So staying awake during that is actually quite a big sacrifice. This is one of the areas where I think Ofgem needs to be a lot more proactive to protect vulnerable consumers, because people in fuel poverty are more likely to own older and cheaper appliances,
Absolutely.
which will be a bigger fire risk.
I didn't know that about the fire risk, and thank goodness for sharing it. And I'm sure it's a point that will sink in with many people listening or watching our conversation. The final point, as far as What Logic is concerned, and the brilliant work that you and the team do there, the thing that gets me, and I'm going to be talking to Vicky Price, one of my economist friends, in just a moment about it, is everything I read tells me that wholesale energy prices are falling, that the market is sniffing around for some stability, finding a little bit here and there. Why on earth are we not hearing more and more good news about the actual price of the energy that we consume, whether it's through one of these tariffs or however it might be? I mean, this clearly is a market that's not fit for purpose at the moment, Catherine.
Well, unfortunately, this comes back to the price cap. Ofgem has been extremely clear with the markets that it expects suppliers to hedge their gas and electricity purchases in the wholesale market in line with the way that the price cap is calculated. And that means they have to buy in advance in a pretty rigid way. And so what people are paying now reflects the prices that suppliers had access to 3 months ago. And we should probably see those reductions coming through in the next cap adjustment, which will be from the beginning of April.
Yeah, sure. Well, lots more to talk about. Catherine, you're always welcome on the programme. Thank you for your balance and impartial advice and guidance. What Logic is one of those websites that's well worth visiting, and you can hear more thoughts from Catherine and her colleagues there. My great thanks to her and the team for joining us on Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GBNews TV and Radio, where we've plenty more still coming up on the programme this afternoon. Nadeem Zahawi's offered his explanation and defence after it emerges that he had agreed a settlement with Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. We'll be discussing that next, but first let's take a look at the weather forecast.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Today and over the next few days, the UK is a bit of a battleground between cold and milder air. High pressure over Scandinavia, but stretching its way down into southeastern areas of England, is holding the cold air intact here. The frontal systems, though, that are trying to push their way into the north and west are also dredging up some milder air. Milder air at this time of the year, though, is accompanied by a fair amount of cloud, and we will see some patchy outbreaks of rain and drizzle continuing across southwest Scotland and other Irish Sea coastal areas overnight. Where we hold on to the clearer skies, further to the south and east, temperatures will be dropping off quite rapidly, down to -5, -4 Celsius in some towns and cities. This will be accompanied by freezing fog developing overnight. Could be quite dense in places, so do just take care where you are heading out first thing on Monday morning. Likely to linger through the morning across the likes of Cambridgeshire, but eventually clearing away to allow some brighter spells. Cloud pushing its way into Kent and areas of East Anglia. Meanwhile, the cloud over northern and western areas is going to remain fairly persistent, and it could be another largely grey day with further outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Going to stay mild in the north and west, though. Highs of 9, 10 degrees Celsius here, but only around 3 degrees further to the south and east. Into Monday evening, it's a relatively similar picture, but because we've now got the cloud filtering its way into the far southeast, the frost will just hold off a bit more here, and it'll be that central slice of England where temperatures will readily drop off once again. As we move into the rest of the week, that cloud in the north and west is slowly going to push its way southwards with this frontal system. So we will eventually see some cloudier and also milder conditions across southern areas of England as we move towards the middle of the week. Behind that cold front, though, we will see an ingress of some slightly colder air, so temperatures will fall off a bit for the likes of Edinburgh and Belfast, but not too cold, more around average for the time of year by the time we get to Wednesday and Thursday. See you later.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, it is 2 o'clock. I'm Aaron Armstrong. Welcome to GB News. Let's get you up to date with all of the latest headlines. A manhunt is underway in California after at least 10 people were killed in a shooting at a Lunar New Year festival. A warning, the following contains flashing images. Thousands of people had gathered at Monterey Park near Los Angeles when a gunman opened fire. At least 10 other people have been injured, some of whom are in a critical condition. Police are looking for a male suspect who fled the scene. They say it's too early to determine his motive. Labour's calling for an urgent investigation into claims the chairman of the BBC, Richard Sharp, helped Boris Johnson arrange a loan weeks before the then Prime Minister recommended Sharp for the job. The Sunday Times claims Sharp helped Boris Johnson guarantee a loan of up to £800,000 when he was in financial difficulty in late 2020, while Sharp was announced as the government's choice for the BBC position in January 2021. Both men say there was no conflict of interest, but Labour and the SNP have called for an independent inquiry. Meanwhile, a cabinet minister has told GB News Nadeem Zahawi has the Prime Minister's support following allegations about his tax affairs. The Conservative Party chairman's admitted he did reach a settlement with HMRC, believed to be almost £5 million, following an error over a multi-million-pound shareholding in the polling company YouGov. Labour's called his position untenable, but the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says he believes Mr Zahawi has paid his taxes.
I don't know any more details than what he has already put in the public domain. I don't think it would be right or proper for me to speculate or guess about any further details about his tax affairs. But he has been a successful entrepreneur, building a company which has paid tax, employing people who have paid taxes, and he has himself paid tax, a considerable amount, because he's been successful.
The Business Secretary has warned energy firms he will name and shame those forcing households to switch to prepayment meters. Grant Shapps has asked companies to stop moving households onto expensive prepaid tariffs. He says they should instead focus on those helping those struggling to pay their bills. The energy companies have also been asked by Mr Shapps to reveal the number of warrant applications they have made to enter the properties. European countries are putting renewed pressure on Germany to authorise the supply of its tanks to Ukraine. Several countries want to send their German-made Leopard tanks, but they need Germany to give it the green light. Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania say Germany, as a leading European power, has a special responsibility in restoring peace on the continent. Berlin insists it's not blocking deliveries and has yet to make a decision about supplying its tanks to Ukraine. US investigators have found more classified documents during a 13-hour search of President Joe Biden's home in Delaware. Some were from Biden's time as a senator, others from when he served under Barack Obama as vice president. They're the latest in a series of classified documents found in his possession. Former President Donald Trump is facing a criminal investigation over his handling of sensitive documents. At least 300 migrants have arrived in the UK on 8 small boats overnight, making it the busiest day of Channel crossings so far this year. GB News understands a few other boats also set off this morning, but they've not yet made it to the UK. The boats were monitored by French naval vessels, which can only intervene if the migrants get into difficulties. Today's arrivals bring the total number of those crossing the Channel this year to 450. The Scottish Environment Minister says the use of dogs to hunt and kill wild animals has no place in modern Scotland. Mary McCallan's comments come ahead of next week's vote on the new Hunting with Dogs bill. Since 2002, it's been against the law to hunt a wild animal with a dog, with the new bill expected to close loopholes in current laws. And Buckingham Palace has revealed the Queen will be crowned alongside the King in a break with tradition at the Coronation in May. Charles and Camilla will be part of the televised service conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury on the 6th of May. A concert will be held at Windsor Castle the following day, featuring what the palace have called global music icons. Thousands of events are expected to take place across the country, with a bank holiday declared for Monday the 8th. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens, but now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
And as I did once or twice yesterday, I'm going to nick a few bits from your news bulletin there to discuss with the brilliant Olivia Utley, who is our political correspondent and once again has been kind enough to join me live in the studio. The Observer, and you might argue, he said cynically, they would, wouldn't they, say Zahawi fights for his political life after admitting tax error. Alex Dean, former supporter of Worker with Dave Cameron, was in the studio a little earlier on, and he said it's not a great look, but it doesn't feel to him to be a terminal affair. There's another piece inside The Observer that says the NHS debacle and the public sector strikes could be what could be much more serious for this government. But Labour have now turned their fire onto the Prime Minister, saying how much did he know before all of this broke?
Yes, so it's a bit of an embarrassing episode. So far, I think I'd agree with Alex Dean in thinking that it probably isn't the thing that's going to sort of bring the Tories down. It's not going to be the straw that broke the camel's back. But we've now had Ian Duncan-Smith coming out, very senior Conservative, and saying that he thinks that Nadine Zahawi should get it all out in the open, which suggests there might be more than we already know. Labour now turning to Rishi Sunak, and of course it plays in with their general strategy of attack on Rishi Sunak, which is that, you know, he's a wealthy global man who doesn't really understand what it's like to be an ordinary person living in Britain. It is embarrassing for Zahawi. It all comes down to how much of the shares from the sale of YouGov his father was entitled to. When they sold the company, he put some shares in his father's offshore account. He claims that that's because his father helped him with the setup of the business and so that his father was entitled to them. HMRC think that it was essentially a tax dodge. Zahawi has paid the fine, and the HMRC has said that it is carelessness. But overall, it's a bad look, and it does feel a little bit at the moment as though, although none of these mini scandals are sort of terminal in themselves, it could be, you know, a death by 1,000 tiny scandals.
It may be kite flying, but there's another intriguing story in the papers, the broadsheets this morning, to suggest that this story was so well known across Whitehall that there were objections to Nadeem getting his knighthood, which was proposed in Johnson's resignation list. Now, if Whitehall and his mate knew, Number 10 knew,
Well, yes, there's a very interesting story in the Times suggesting that Nadeem Zahawi was on the honours list for the new year, and they've got some interesting quotes from someone who was very close to the business in HMRC, who said that he was struck off the list because HMRC were looking into his taxes, and the idea that this was all happening while he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, obviously not a particularly good look, and it does reflect badly on Rishi Sunak. We saw a few months ago Rishi Sunak struggling with the Gavin Williamson episode, when he wanted to show his faith in Gavin Williamson. And I think part of the problem is that because Rishi Sunak is relatively weak in the wider Conservative Party, remember, he doesn't have the support of the membership particularly, he's very, very dependent on his close friends and allies. And when something goes wrong, he wants to keep them by his side. And that sometimes means that it feels as though he's building a bit of a rod for his own back.
The other big story, and just while you're answering, we were running pictures there of Nadeem chatting away, but also of the chairman of the BBC, and the Boris Johnson story about the loan. Reading as much as I could about that this morning, it seemed to me that the chair of the BBC is potentially in slightly more trouble and tricky waters than the former Prime Minister.
Yes, not a great story all round. Essentially, Richard Sharp, the former director of the BBC, helped to secure this £800,000 loan for the former Prime Minister when he was in financial difficulty. Again, it might not be terminal, but we know that Boris Johnson is already facing the Privileges Committee, and this sort of air of scandal that still wafts around him makes life not only difficult for him, but also for Rishi Sunak, because the scandal clings to the party, really. And we know that Boris Johnson, well, we very much suspect that Boris Johnson is on some sort of manoeuvres, and his friends...
Dan Hodges, who I like a lot, writes in the Mail, is consistent on this story, and again says today, or was it yesterday possibly, Boris Johnson throwing his hat back in the ring. It may not be tomorrow, but it will happen, and he has a lot of friends out there who would like it to happen. Of that there is no doubt at all. And he is in Kyiv today, still strutting his stuff, not on the domestic stage, but for domestic consumption, strutting his stuff on the international stage. Boris Johnson's story does not have a big fat line under it yet.
No, absolutely. And there was a really interesting piece in the Times, I think it was yesterday, by Katie Ball, suggesting that actually what Rishi Sunak's closest friends are more worried about than a Johnson comeback is just Johnson making life very difficult for Sunak from the backbenchers. So going to Kyiv is a perfect example of this. Boris Johnson is still remarkably popular in Ukraine and has this air of the statesman about him. There was a time when they were making croissants in the shape of Boris Johnson's head in Ukraine. And I think that having that reputation as a sort of leader, post-Brexit leader, has stuck with Johnson and hasn't really transferred over to Sunak. And there's a general sort of feeling growing in Westminster that Sunak is a little bit timid. And having Johnson making these big magnanimous gestures sort of shows him up in comparison.
Fascinating, and having got those chieftain tanks on their way, now would have been the time to strike while the iron is hot. Intriguing stuff. As always, a real pleasure. Olivia, thank you very much indeed for sharing part of your Saturday and indeed part of your Sunday with me. You're always welcome on the programme. Olivia Attlee there, GB News political correspondent. Now, we touched a little bit on some of this a moment ago with Catherine, but a new study from Citizens Advice Scotland has found that an estimated 1.7 million adults in Scotland are turning down the heat as their bills rise. An analysis from the charity by YouGov has estimated that 1.7 million adults are making that move because they have little or no choice, turning down the thermometer or simply not heating rooms in their home at all in order to deal with rising energy costs. Joining me now, I'm delighted to say, is the former joint head of the UK's Government Economic Service and Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economics and Business Research, my dear friend Vicky Price. Vicky, when I was talking to Catherine about this earlier on, there's a row over curious prepaid meters and tariffs going up and overnight tariffs that no longer work or what have you. Are we talking about an energy market with wholesale prices falling quite sharply, that simply isn't functioning for anybody?
I'm afraid we are, and it's been going on for quite some time. I mean, remember, it's worse than that. If you look at the whole renewables area, which is supposed to be, of course, producing energy very, very cheaply, in fact, the whatever is produced by those generators has been charged to individuals mostly at the higher wholesale price for gas. So that's been going on for quite some time. So a complete rethink of how the electricity market works is absolutely necessary right now. But I've got to add, it isn't only in the UK. I think a similar problem exists in Europe, and they're looking at it too. So I'm hopeful that when all that is reviewed, we're going to end up with something a little bit more sensible, which actually reflects the cost of producing energy rather than what perhaps the international wholesale price is showing us. And you're absolutely right, of course, that recently wholesale prices have been coming down, and maybe we should look at that as a positive, because if you look at Europe, which has been most affected by this because of the proximity with Russia and the fact they relied so much on gas supplies from there, gas prices in Europe are now back to where they were, which is extraordinary, in September 2021. That is, 6 months before or 5 months before the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. So that should be reflected in all our prices. And for the moment, it isn't. But at least it gives us some hope that when particularly the electricity price cap is looked at again in a few months' time, we're going to be looking at a wholesale market which is considerably more benign than was the case before.
Well, Catherine, my earlier guest from GenWatch was saying exactly that it's not only the market that is no longer fit for purpose, and maybe Grant Shapps needs to sit down with Ofgem and other interested parties to sort that out. But it was also the whole price cap system and the Treasury. So maybe Jeremy Hunt should find time to pop along there. You nodded to my next question in your brilliant answer to my last one, and that is asking you as an economist. It still seems to me that the cost of energy, and whether it be cooking or heating our homes, and that data from Scotland and Citizens Advice, genuinely quite terrifying. That is at the pounding heart still of the economic crisis that we are facing in the UK. Do you see any glimmers of hope, like the Governor of the Bank of England did in the latest set of inflation numbers, or are you still deeply and gravely worried?
On the inflation front, I think loads of people have been saying for quite some time that if energy prices stabilise, or other prices like food prices, which unfortunately in the UK haven't stabilised, but internationally they have. In fact, they've been falling for a while. So once they're stabilised, what you might see very quickly is a very substantial reduction in inflation rate, because just think arithmetically. So prices went up very significantly. Let's say they're then stabilized where they are. In a few months' time, when you're comparing a year earlier, then there is no inflation, no energy inflation there. So your inflation rate should drop very, very significantly. What is happening, though, nevertheless, is that what we're seeing in the UK right now is that food prices, retail prices, are going up very significantly because there are loads of costs that perhaps hadn't been passed on before. There is some concern that maybe some of the producers are over-egging it and maybe raising prices a bit too much, and maybe supermarkets are not controlling prices sufficiently. So we still have this problem with food prices. And what we've also seen is that because of that, energy and food, what is happening is that the consumer, even though they seem to be going out to eat a little bit more than was anticipated, are reducing their retail spending. So if you look at the data which came out just a day or so ago, we've seen retail spending go down in December. We've seen it go down in the last 3 months in volume terms, and we are below where we were pre-pandemic. So it does suggest to me that the consumer is still very, very careful. But yes, of course, if things improve, and also if their wages maybe start reflecting a little bit more what is happening on the inflation front, we'd see. We got strikes, we've got everything else going on right now. But if they do, then perhaps things will improve and the consumer household disposable incomes may not drop as rapidly as had been forecast. Remember, we've also got tax rises. They're sort of indirect tax rises, but they are still there. So the consumer is certainly worse off this year than they were a year ago.
Those indirect tax rises, there were a couple of very thoughtful pieces in yesterday's newspapers, and they are irrefutably stealth taxes, in the sense it's the amount of money that you and I and everybody else can earn before we pay any taxes. And I think it was the Times newspaper that particularly said, politically very short-sighted of this government, because those who will hurt most are the aspiring middle classes.
Well, it's true. What's happening is that because if you get any wage increases, even if they're not completely in line with inflation, they may well put you into the standard basic rate tariff, which you were not at before. So suddenly you start paying taxes. And if you're earning a little bit more, then you can very, very easily get into the higher 40% tax bracket. And there will be millions who will be in that situation in 2023, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies and others. So yes, that way, what you're finding is that you're ending up with a lot less in your pocket than you had anticipated, and you're paying a lot more tax. That's good, of course, for the government because they're collecting more taxes. But what it means is that even if inflation slows down, but you manage to get some wage increases to compensate for whatever was happening before, you may well end up with a lot less money in your pocket than you would have done otherwise. So the result of that, of course, is that real household disposable income is forecast to decline this year, as it did actually last year too. On that basis, there isn't very much money left to spend on other things, even though obviously the Brits love going on holiday, and they seem by all the evidence there that they have switched from buying things in shops to eating out, which is good news. We're becoming very continental in this country. I'm glad to see.
Changing patterns as people read the economic runes. Vicky, thank you for helping us do that with your authority and wisdom, as always. Lovely to see you. Thank you very much indeed. The former joint head of the UK's Government Economic Service and Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economics and Business Research, my dear friend Vicky Price, with food for thought. And let me just give a quick reminder that if you weren't with us at the beginning of the programme, do subscribe to our YouTube channel at GBNews, where you can listen again and reflect upon what people like Vicky and Alex Dean and all of my other guests have had to say about the state of the world that we occupy, and whether there's good news just slowly trickling through or not. It's all there on our YouTube channel. Now, joining me live in the studio is another good friend of mine who's been with us from the outset. It's Billy McGannigan, who is the founder of the food bank and family support group Dad's House, looking after those who are in need. It's been a little while since you've been sitting there opposite me. We've just had two fascinating conversations about some indications that things might just be getting a little bit better, particularly on the cost of energy. Is demand for your services, because you don't only do food and roof over your head, you do general advice and guidance on economic matters, how to make ends meet and what have you. Is demand declining slightly, or is it as lively and busy as ever?
The demand for the work that we do in helping with small grants for local families in Kensington and Chelsea and Hammersmith and Fulham, Alastair, is going through the roof. And what you were talking about with the Economy 7 and prepayment meters, I have never seen anything like it. We've regularly had families running out of gas or electric every week, certainly 3 or 4 days a month. And it's not just the gas or electricity, it's anxiety, it's the mental health, it's the issues of damp in properties,
But on the Economy 7 thing, it genuinely shocked me, is that Catherine was saying that it was a system that once upon a time probably was quite sensible, but it was designed for a different era when we used different ways of heating our homes and what have you. Frankly, nowadays, it really is hardly appropriate for anybody, and yet the prices are going up and these energy companies are switching folk to prepaid meters and all the rest of it. The government at least stood up and is out there trying to fight.
The government are helping. They're paying vulnerable families £66 per month as it stands just now. So that helps a long way. But if you think about the families that we help, we're using between £15 and £30 per week on the prepayment meters. That's jumped up to between £70 and £120 a week. And if you're on unemployment benefit, I think the actual rate is £78 a week. They don't have it, so they're absolutely struggling. And that's the single people, the young men and women or older people who regularly run out of gas and electric. So we've launched lunch clubs in Dad's House, and we've got a brilliant cook called Jemana who is absolutely amazing. So we'll have 50 families a week that they can come, they can keep warm, and it's an invitation only, Alastair, you know. So again, we built up a really close relationship with some of the families that we help, and it's much worse because of not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow.
I understand that, but ignorance is a total nightmare in all of these matters. But I picked up something you just said there. They just don't have the money, they don't know what's going to happen. Yet the government has a big and busy website telling people who particularly are on the lowest possible income that there is still a great deal of support out there for people if you apply for it and seek it out. Are you finding that you have to steer some people in that direction because they didn't know what was available to them and they're not picking it up yet?
Well, we're a tiny charity,
sure.
But we've helped over maybe 60,000 families in 3 years. You know, we meet families who wouldn't go to Citizens Advice or the Trussell Trust. You know, and we meet families who are local, who are vulnerable. Maybe English is their second language. So it's word of mouth. That's the families who we meet that the local authority would never meet in a million years. You know, we don't believe in the food voucher system. You know, and it's really important to build up a relationship of care, kindness and strength, you know. And when people and families trust you, they'll come back, you know, and they're more comfortable at explaining what goes on behind closed doors. It's not just asking for £20 to help with the meter. It's building that close relationship with families and the community.
But one thing that you've always believed in, and I've found it particularly appealing in all of our conversations that we've had from the very first time that we met here in the studio, and that is that you do passionately believe in self-help as well, and informing people on what they can do for themselves. And you've got people like Lee Anderson, the Tory MP, saying there's an awful lot of people going to food banks who don't frankly need them.
I've never met one. I've never met one person who's came to our food bank who doesn't need it. And bear in mind, we've helped thousands of people, Alastair, you know. And what people don't realise is people are anxious and aggressive now, you know, because it's a whole different psyche when people are looking for help. They're sick of going online looking at links because there's no help at the end of it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't actually have the internet at home anymore. You know, so they come to Dad's house, we'll have a cup of tea and a chat, we'll go on to these websites, and you know what? One client can take an hour.
Billy, we have to leave it there this time, but as you know, you're always welcome on the programme, and I look forward to next time when I hope there will be some better news.
Well, hopefully,
but
Alastair.
Thanks for what you do.
Oh, thank you.
And through you, best wishes to those that you seek to help. That's my friend Billy McGranagan here, founder of Dad's House. And we've plenty more still to come this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends. London's Chinese community will be celebrating New Year in the spectacular way that they always do, welcoming the Year of the Rabbit, hosted in both English and in Mandarin. We will have the latest at one of those celebrations taking place in London next. But first, let's bring you up to date with your weekend weather.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vaughtry here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Today and over the next few days, the UK is a bit of a battleground between cold and milder air. High pressure over Scandinavia, but stretching its way down into southeastern areas of England is holding the cold air intact here. The frontal systems, though, that are trying to push their way into the north and west are also dredging up some milder air. Milder air at this time of the year, though, is accompanied by a fair amount of cloud, and we will see some patchy outbreaks of rain and drizzle continuing across southwest Scotland and other Irish Sea coastal areas overnight. Where we hold on to the clearer skies, further to the south and east, temperatures will be dropping off quite rapidly down to -5, -4 Celsius in some towns and cities. This will be accompanied by freezing fog developing overnight. Could be quite dense in places, so do just take care where you are heading out first thing on Monday morning. Likely to linger through the morning across the likes of Cambridgeshire, but eventually clearing away to allow some brighter spells. Cloud pushing its way into Kent and areas of East Anglia. Meanwhile, the cloud over northern and western areas is going to remain fairly persistent, and it could be another largely grey day with further outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Going to stay mild in the north and west though, highs of 9, 10 degrees Celsius here, but only around 3 degrees further to the south and east. Into Monday evening, it's a relatively similar picture, but because we've now got the cloud filtering its way into the far southeast, the frost will just hold off a bit more here, and it'll be that central slice of England where temperatures will readily drop off once again. As we move into the rest of the week, that cloud in the north and west is slowly going to push its way southwards with this frontal system. So we will eventually see some cloudier and also milder conditions across southern areas of England as we move towards the middle of the week. Behind that cold front, though, we will see an ingress of some slightly colder air, so temperatures will fall off a bit for the likes of Edinburgh and Belfast, but not too cold, more around average for the time of year by the time we get to Wednesday and Thursday. See you later.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious, much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It is 2:30. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. A suspect on the run in California after a shooting in which at least 10 people have been killed. A warning, the following contains some flashing images. Emergency services have been responding to an incident in Monterey Park near Los Angeles where thousands of people had gathered for a Lunar New Year festival. Another 10 people have been taken to hospital to be treated for injuries. At least one of those is in a critical condition. It is the 5th mass shooting in the US this month. Labour's called for a parliamentary inquiry into allegations the BBC chairman helped Boris Johnson arrange a loan. The former Prime Minister later recommended Richard Sharp for the role at the broadcaster. The Sunday Times claims Sharp, the Tory donor, was involved in talks to finance Mr Johnson's Downing Street lifestyle in late 2020. He insists there was no conflict of interest. A spokesperson for the former Prime Minister has dismissed the report as rubbish. Meanwhile, a cabinet minister has told GB News Nadhim Zahawi has the Prime Minister's support following allegations about his tax affairs. The Conservative Party chairman is under pressure over claims he tried to avoid tax and then had to pay it back in a multi-million-pound settlement with HMRC. Labour's called his position untenable, but the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly believes Mr Zahawi has always paid his taxes.
I don't know any more details than what he has already put in the public domain. I don't think it would be right or proper for me to speculate or guess about any further details about his tax affairs. But he has been a successful entrepreneur, building a company which has paid tax, employing people who have paid taxes, and he has himself paid tax, a considerable amount, because he's been successful.
US investigators have found more classified documents during a 13-hour search of President Joe Biden's home in Delaware. Some of them from President Biden's time as a senator and others from his role as vice president to Barack Obama. A special counsel has been appointed to investigate how the president has handled sensitive documents. That is it for the moment. TV, online and DAB plus radio. This is GB News. Now it is back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
And thank you very much indeed. And thank you indeed for watching and listening to me and my friends and Aaron and his news. You've been getting in touch with us on the integrity of politics, and especially you've been very candid with your views about the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Here are just a few of your thoughts. Nigel gets us underway. I think that Sunak is just a gopher, a placeman, a Jeeves to serve the powerful. No Prime Minister nowadays has any control of anything. No levers to pull, just instructions to obey. He is treading on eggshells, hoping to avoid a bust-up with the bullies around the establishment blob. Panto politics plays on, he says. Well, there you go, blimey. Alan joins in the conversation as well, saying, with the passing of each administration, my faith in politics falls away. Each government seems more incompetent than the last. And Dave says, I am starting to believe that Rishi Sunak will be the last Conservative Prime Minister this century. I hope I'm wrong, he says, but there seems to be a severe lack of genuine Conservatives that can restore power to this badly broken party. Well, you really have given it some thought today, haven't you? Gracious me, thank you very much indeed. Do keep those views coming in and do, of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are at GB News, and you can find all of the interviews that we've done on this subject and all of our previous programmes as well. And a lot of it is well worth watching, so I hope very much indeed that you do that. Now, you could make it a New Year's resolution, I suppose. Talking of which, London's Chinese New Year celebrations welcoming the Year of the Rabbit, hosted in both English and Mandarin, are traditionally held throughout Chinatown and the West End, and are thought to be the biggest Chinese New Year celebrations outside of Asia. Well, our national reporter, Theo Chicombo, joins me live now from Trafalgar Square, where those celebrations are indeed taking place. It is one of the great public events every year when it comes round. But the Chinese have been saying this is the first time they've really been able to get down to it properly for quite some time because of the pandemic. What's it like?
Yes, good afternoon from here at Trafalgar Square. It's incredibly busy here. I would say maybe tens of thousands into the hundreds of thousands. People are coming in and coming out of this area. People have been travelling from all corners of the UK. I've spent some time in Chinatown, where it's considerably packed over there, and it's a similar picture here. There's stalls, displays, music just behind me, where people are in the centre there celebrating the Chinese New Year. It's the year of the rabbit. It was the year of the tiger, and it's the year of the rabbit this year, and they're saying this is meant to be a peaceful year, particularly for those who come from China. Now, we do know a couple of weeks ago the Chinese economy and the borders itself opened again just a couple of weeks ago, which is essentially had shut out around 1.4 billion people from the rest of the world. So this has been an opportunity for many people to reunite with their family members and their friends, particularly those who are outside of China and those who've been able to come back in. And for those who aren't able to get over there during this period, they of course have got celebrations here in the capital and of course across the rest of the country. So museums have been putting on displays. There have been parades throughout London, which started here in the early hours of this morning from the Charing Cross area going towards Chinatown. And of course these celebrations are expected to last for around 16 days as people celebrate the Chinese New Year starting from today. So it's a happy Lunar New Year today, and plenty of people will be here throughout the rest of the afternoon.
All right, thank you very much indeed. Our national reporter, Theo Chakumba, there in a noisy and celebratory Trafalgar Square with the entrance point to Soho and Chinatown just behind him. Brilliantly handled there by Theo Chakumba. It's noisy doing that sort of thing, but I thought he did very well indeed. And if you are Chinese, a very happy new year to you. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come in what remains of the programme this afternoon, including members of the largest teaching union in Scotland, the EIS, are set to walk out in the latest round of industrial action over pay tomorrow. It's the start of strike action taking place by teachers over the next couple of weeks. We'll be discussing that next. But first, we're going to award you and us a quick break.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I just echo every word of that. Some of the best political interviews around there with my lovely friend Gloria. Don't miss any of them. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. Now, commuters like me have long been unable to let the train with any certainty reliably take the strain. Well, tomorrow we'll see even more industrial action. Next up, school children and their parents, as teachers join the fray, starting in Scotland. Members of the largest teaching union there, the EIS, walk out over pay and working conditions. It comes after members of the National Education Teachers Union also announced dates for their industrial action in the coming weeks, starting in the first week of February. Joining me now to discuss this is Lord Rafe Lucas, who's the editor-in-chief of the Good Schools Guide and a Conservative peer. Rafe, always good to see you.
You too, Alastair.
Schools and children have been through so much, which you and I have talked about many times before in the context of the pandemic. But a thing struck us about this was that there is a division of opinion. There are a number of heads out there who are saying to their staff, ignore the strike call, come to work, we will welcome you, we will look after you. That's potentially quite tricky, isn't it, Rafe?
I think, like every strike, you can have local arrangements and local relationships which enable the teachers who would otherwise be on strike to join in being part of the school. I think teachers really feel and understand how much our children have been through over the pandemic and how many are still struggling to catch up and understand the damage that a strike will do. And I think we ought to applaud that attitude and understand that sometimes that sort of consideration overcomes the personal wish for better remuneration.
Just a voluntary version of the minimum cover that the government is proposing to legislate for. The other twist to this, and it starts in Scotland, but I've said it will spread across the entire United Kingdom over forthcoming weeks, is that for working parents, it's an additional problem. Of course, the kids will suffer. They'll lose lessons. They'll lose time with their precious teachers. But there's an awful lot of mums and dads out there who rely on school to be the safe haven for their little ones during the working day, whilst they, mum, dad, maybe both of them, go off to work to make ends meet. I mean, that is that's an economic problem as well as an educational one.
Yes, it is. It's a strike which will hit us hard. It's going to be rail strike. You don't go into work that day. You can probably manage things or car share or find a way around it. Your child doesn't get to school. You're stuck. You've got to look after that child and can't really work. So it's a hard hitting strike, and one that won't do long-term relationships between parents and teachers any good.
When you do the Good Schools Guide, you look at ethos, attitude, and many things, as well as just exam results and how they're doing with the teaching. In all your years of experience, do you fear that this is a generation of teachers who've lost their way a little, rather like nurses, giving their willingness to down tools in pursuit of pay and albeit conditions too?
I remember teacher strikes decades ago, and I don't think the NEU or NUT, as it was then, has ever been an easy union to deal with. So, no, I don't, in my contact with teachers, really see any lack of dedication to children and enjoyment of the sheer joy of teaching. Is something I come across a lot. I really appreciate the current generation of teachers. There will always be some, and particularly in the middle of a political storm, some for whom those sort of arguments carry the day. But I think in general, we've got a lovely lot of teachers.
Well, I'm glad you said that, and I'm glad I found time for you to say it, as it were. But final question is this, Rafe. As a Tory peer, a working politician, as well as one of the great educational experts, do you stand with the Prime Minister and Chancellor of the Exchequer in holding the line against what they both describe as potentially inflationary pay rises, or would you swallow your pride, your economic pride a bit, and get in there, settle it, and get the schools back up and running?
I think they're right to hold the line. I think we've got to get inflation down. Having inflation at this sort of level is so damaging. You can't just accept it and bake it into the system. You've got to take action to drop it. That isn't fun for any of us as a process. But it's necessary. We need to get back to a level of economic sanity and get away from the idea that we're happy with prices going up 10% a year. It's so damaging to the state of the nation and the economy. So I back them. I would like to see teacher pay rising over time. They have fallen a bit behind since 2010. I'd like to see that coming back, but not as a inflation busting rise now. No, we've got to do things as a nation to get the economy right, and it's not the time to pay teachers ahead of inflation.
Rafe, great to talk to you as always. Thank you very much for breaking into your Sunday afternoon to do so. Very best to you, and do keep in touch. Always welcome on the programme. That was Lord Rafe Lucas, who's Conservative peer, as he said, with profound thoughts on what he thinks of the current generation of teachers, but also what he thinks personally on economic policy. Now, we believe passionately in balance here as well on GB News. So Scotland's largest teaching union, the EIS, have provided us with this statement on those planned strikes that we've just been discussing, and I quote, "Scotland's teachers want to see this dispute settled to allow full focus on education recovery and also closing the poverty-related achievement gap. Our strike action will continue until a new, suitably improved and fair offer is put on the table." That is from the EIS, the biggest teaching union in Scotland. And they said that communication is the key to it all. So I hope that you found that balanced and reasonable as well. Now, communication is, of course, said to be the key to life. But what happens when it's profoundly difficult to communicate with members of your own family? One mother from Cornwall has led the charge to ensure that parents of deaf children can learn sign language for free, and has petitioned the government for this important change after finding out that night courses to do it would cost a lot of money. So the campaign is ongoing, and there is a petition online which is gaining attraction. It certainly caught our eye. But what has the government response been to it? I'm delighted to be joined by Katie Littlejohns, who is behind that campaign. And there she is. Katie, have you had a response from the Department for Education?
Yes, I've had 3 responses now. They actually all state the same, that I need to speak to the Department of Work and Pensions. They've explained that there's an adult education budget available. Unfortunately, if you actually read into that, it's not available to everybody. It's actually not very accessible for working parents like myself. It's aimed more for like 19 to 24-year-olds and is devolved differently through each council. So it's not really an option, and you have to research to find that. It's not something that's a readily available information for parents. I have written to the DWP. I've actually heard from them a very short letter telling me that the education department is responsible for this. So, I'm a bit stuck at the moment.
Well, it's an intriguing anecdote that actually tells people who are kind enough to be watching our conversation, or if they are able to, listening to our conversation, how truly incredible dysfunctional government sometimes can be. But let me pick out the good bit of your observations there, and that is that there is a recognition, in whichever department it might be, that this is a real need and that there is some help available for it. How big a need is it? When we were talking about doing this item, you may or may not know that one of my bosses, both of her siblings, have deafness, and therefore she is very, very keen and very interested in this subject. But I had to confess I had no idea how widespread it is, particularly between parents and, as you said yourself, small children, not teenagers or young 20s who may well get some help from DWP, but kids at school.
Yeah, so like yourself, it was something I was oblivious to until 2 years ago when I had my little baby boy, Alvy. He was diagnosed at just 7 weeks old, and he had hearing aids by 10 weeks old. It was a brilliant, quick response. Like, the service from audiology was incredible, and the support from the council has equally been incredible. But access to sign language is incredibly limited. It's difficult, it's not free, but it's a communication, and for so many people, children, it's going to be their main form of communication. And that's something that shouldn't need to be bought or have to qualify for funding. It's something that everybody should have fair access to. It's something I certainly had never thought about. You know, I'm from a hearing family. I was brought up to speak English like most people and I just think it's a shame that you've got this like demographic that's being completely left behind, and the isolation that can cause can be devastating. Language acquisition is vital for child development, and if it's not available, then we need to do something about that. I've been very fortunate that the British Deaf Association and the NDCS have been incredibly supportive of the campaign, and they've now jumped on board, and they're amazing, and I couldn't be doing it without them.
Well, that's lovely of you to say that, and they're both great organisations. I know a little bit about them. Let's cut a deal here. We have to end it now because we're coming up towards the top of the hour. But keep in touch, and if you get any semblance of sense out of either DWP or the Department of Health, you let us know, and we'll continue the conversation and about Alvy's brilliant progress there as well. But from all of us here, the very best of luck to you, and it's entirely our pleasure. And you keep in touch with us. Thank you very much indeed. Katie Littlejohn's there, campaigner for the sign language courses for parents of deaf children. Absolutely, as she said herself, not just a nice luxury, but an absolute right. So let's hope government sorts itself out over that one. Now, just before we go, Gloria De Piero, who I spoke about earlier on, singing her praises, partly because she's my friend, but also partly because she's an absolutely brilliant political interviewer, talking of which has an exclusive interview with the Mayor of Greater Manchester, one Andy Burnham, this evening. And she asked Mr Burnham if he was planning to run for leader of the Labour Party should a vacancy occur. I said at the very top of the programme I'm not sure that that was likely to be the case, and that Sir Keir Starmer seemed to me to be fairly well enshrined. But that's just me. Who am I? Let's hear what Mr Burnham has to say.
Well, I'm not planning to go back. I mean, I'm happy where I am. And let me say, baby, this is an exclusive for you. I will be running for a third term as Mayor of Greater Manchester. I love what I'm doing here. I think what we're building here is a big part of the answer to make British politics work better. And that is more power in the hands of a place like this. You know, this place is amazing, Greater Manchester. You know, the people here, the kind of passion that people have got, the identity. You give a place like this more power, it's unbelievable what it can do with it, and hopefully we're already showing that.
Gloria De Piero there talking to Andy Burnham, who gave her the exclusive. He is definitely going to run for a third time as Mayor of Manchester, but he is not going to be running as leader of the Labour Party, even if a vacancy presents itself in the immediate future. You heard it here first, and you can watch that full interview on GB News' show Gloria Meets, where you'll find out who the real person is behind the politician. That is every Sunday here at 6 o'clock on GB News TV and radio. But as far as I'm concerned, Alastair Stewart and friends, I'm afraid that's all that we have time for today. But I will be back at midday on Saturday and then again on Sunday next weekend. I hope very much indeed that you find time for us as well. Meantime, enjoy the rest of your day and what's left of the weekend as well. From all of us here, a very good afternoon to you. Bye-bye.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Today and over the next few days, the UK is a bit of a battleground between cold and milder air. High pressure over Scandinavia, but stretching its way down into southeastern areas of England is holding the cold air intact here. The frontal systems, though, that are trying to push their way into the north and west are also dredging up some milder air. Milder air at this time of the year, though, is accompanied by a fair amount of cloud, and we will see some patchy outbreaks of rain and drizzle continuing across southwest Scotland and other Irish Sea coastal areas overnight. Where we hold on to the clearer skies, further to the south and east, temperatures will be dropping off quite rapidly, down to -5, -4 Celsius in some towns and cities. This will be accompanied by freezing fog developing overnight. Could be quite dense in places, so do just take care where you are heading out first thing on Monday morning. Likely to linger through the morning across the likes of Cambridgeshire, but eventually clearing away to allow some brighter spells. Cloud pushing its way into Kent and areas of East Anglia. Meanwhile, the cloud over northern and western areas is going to remain fairly persistent and